In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to download paint.net. First, we're going to go to getpaint.net to download the program. The link will be in the description below. Then, go to the download section. As you can see, you can either download the paid version to support the program, or you can download the free version. In this tutorial, I'm going to be downloading the free version. Additionally, there's a documentation section so you can learn about the program and some free plugins you can add. So first I'm going to click on this link to download the program installer. Go ahead and save that. Open it once it downloads. And I'm going to start the installation process. Continue. So now it's downloading and extracting the files needed to start paint.net. You can either do an express install or you can do a custom install. I would just recommend the express. I'll do the custom just so you can see it though. First you just have to agree to the terms of service. Then you can check if you want to do updates. Next you choose a spot to save it. And finally you just start the installation. There's really not much to customize here. Cool, so I'm going to go ahead and start paint.net and just give you guys a quick tutorial on how it works. So you have four main panels here. You have the toolbox, the colors, the layers, and the history. The toolbox is pretty self-explanatory. You have a whole bunch of different tools that you can use, and each have a letter shortcut. For example, brush is B, the pencil is P, and the eraser is E. Now each tool also has its own additional settings. If you look up in this panel here, you can see there's a whole bunch of different settings that change depending on the tool that I click on. For the brush, it's pretty simple. You can change the size of the brush, so it can be smaller or bigger or extra large. Then you have the hardness. This basically determines how much blurring there is around the edge. So if I turn it all the way up, there's very little blurring. And if I turn it all the way down, there is a lot of blurring. You get a very soft edge. The next setting is this fill color here. Usually I just leave it on solid, especially if I'm doing pixel art, but you can have there be like a pattern. Especially if you're doing like maybe a webcomic, you might want to do like a little bit of shading and get kind of like a nice little gradient there. Or you can do some other cool effects as well. Let me go ahead and undo that so I can have a fresh canvas here and change this back to normal. The next setting, which I think is a little more important for pixel art, is this anti-aliasing feature. When it's turned on, you get, again, that like kind of blurring around the edge. Even if you turn that hardness all the way up, you still do get a little bit of blurring. If you zoom right in there, it's not like a hard line. You get kind of like a couple of transparent pixels to make it flow more smoothly, which looks great if you're doing a more detailed picture. But if I'm doing pixel art, I don't really want that, so I can take that off. And now you can see when I'm drawing, I get a nice harsh line. There is no blurring or transparency in the pixels. It's all just solid pixels, either black or white. Another cool feature is this blending mode here. You can change it to different things and get different effects depending on what you want. With glow, for example, you can see I'm only adding to the color that I selected. There's a whole bunch of different modes too. There's difference, there's Zor. They all do a whole bunch of different things. Usually I just kind of stay away from that though when I'm doing pixel art. So next, to just talk about this colors panel down here, you have two main colors you can select, either the primary or the secondary colors. Generally, if you're doing like say a shape, you can have it be filled in with an outline. The primary color will be the color that the outline is, and the secondary color will be the fill shape. Additionally, if you're using the brush tool or the pencil tool, you can left click to use the primary color, or you can right click to use the secondary color. That can be kind of helpful if you're trying to, say, do shading and shadows, and you want to switch back and forth really quickly and you don't want to keep switching between colors. It makes it a little more convenient. In addition to just the preset colors that are here, you also have this nice color wheel where you can mess around with it and get exactly what you're looking for. You can also play around with the RGB values, which are red, green, blue, to try to get exactly what you're going for. Then they also have hue, saturation, and value. The hue tells you which shade of color that it is. The saturation tells you how vibrant that color is, and then the value gives you more darkness as you get lower, or if you set it at 100%, you just get that pure color with no black added in. Then there's this opacity down here. That's how transparent basically the color you're going for is. So if I set the transparency pretty low, you can see it's not 100% opaque. If I draw more lines on top of this, it gets a little more opaque every time until you eventually get to 100% opacity. The next thing I want to talk about is this layers panel. So layers, if you don't know, that's kind of like adding sheets of glass on top of each other. So with this background layer, since I'm drawing on top of that white, basically I can't take anything away. So if I want to get that green off of there, I have to undo everything that I did before to try and get that off. I can't go back and change it. However, if for example I add a new layer and I draw on top of these other shapes, instead of erasing what's under there, it's actually still all underneath the first layer without having been touched. If I move the layer down, you can see that everything is still perfectly fine. So in this panel here, you can add layers, you can delete a layer, you can duplicate a layer, you can merge a layer down. So merging layers, you would generally want to do that if, say, you're doing a really detailed person's face. I'll draw a little example here. And first you have maybe the head, and then you do another layer, and you draw in some hair, but you don't want to disturb the layer underneath that you have. And then maybe you do another layer, and you draw some eyes. And after you get it exactly the way that you want it, you just want one layer with the face, so you just merge everything down together so there's no confusion. Generally too, I recommend if you have multiple layers, you name them so it's a little less confusing. If I double click or I click on that settings button in the lower right hand corner, you can go ahead and rename it. So like this one can be, say, eyes. And that's helpful so you don't have to keep going through every single layer and turning it on and off to try to figure out which layer the eyes were on. You can just be like, oh yeah, that's my eyes layer. So then just the last thing that I want to talk about is this little panel up here. So first you have file, that's where you're basically just going to save your work. Then you have edit, that's your undo, redo, copy, paste menu. View, which is a little bit helpful. You can turn on some rulers or like a grid. So that makes it a little bit easier just to see what you're doing sometimes or measure exactly where you are. You can change it between pixels, inches, and centimeters. Under image, you can either resize the whole image or the canvas. Usually, if I am resizing something, I will change the canvas size and not the image size. Say for example, I want to resize this picture and double it, just do 200. By default, it's set to best quality. So when you go ahead and resize it like that, you can see it just basically doubled in size and it made everything kind of a little bit blurry. It's no longer those nice sharp pixel edges that I had before. But if I undo that and I go to image resize, if you change it to nearest neighbor and you do that same 200% resizing, you can see it kept those nice sharp edges with the pixels. So usually I do use that one if I'm going to resize it, and I try to keep it as like the same aspect ratio. If I'm doing 8x8, I'll change it to 64x64 because it's an even multiple of itself. Usually though, what I will do is I will change the canvas size because I'll be like, oh, I don't have enough room to draw everything that I wanted to draw. Well, I'll go ahead and just increase the size of the canvas. And if you do that, you can change the exact number of the pixels you want. You can just keep the image anchored in a certain place, like say if you want it in the top left, you can keep that. For this one, I'm just going to do 200% for a quick example. It automatically sets the background layer to be the secondary fill color. And you can see that it kept my image in the upper left hand corner here, and it just added all this stuff to the lower right. Next you have this layers tab. So what's useful about this one that you can't do in the little panel on the lower right is you can actually flip just a single individual layer and not the entire picture. So say for example, I was like, I don't like this background, I want to go to this background and I want to flip it horizontally. I can go ahead and do that. You can see it doesn't change any of the other layers that I already had made, it just changes that one background layer. Next up I have this adjustments panel. You can mess around with some of the different color settings here. You can make it black and white. You can play around with the brightness or the contrast. You can also play around with the hue and saturation, or you can play around with the curves. So if, for example, I go to the RGB curves, I can say, I don't like that there's so much green in this picture. I'm going to select just the green curve, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit so it's not as green. Now generally this is more useful for like photos and stuff where you're just trying to retouch and you're like, oh man, that sunset is really cool, but it made everything look kind of red. Let's bring the red levels down a little bit. I really don't use it for pixel art as much, but you certainly could if you felt like you just needed to tweak a couple of things. And as you can also see as well, when I'm changing around these hues and levels and colors and saturations and everything, it's actually only affecting the single layer that I'm actively on. You can see if I go to this next layer up here and I do the same thing, it doesn't affect anything because everything is black on that layer, but it does not affect the layer underneath. There we go. And then finally there's this effects panel. Generally if you download any plugins, they will either show up under the adjustments or the effects panels. So mostly I don't really use anything on this for pixel art editing. Some of the cool things though are they have this Gaussian blur where you can just kind of like blur out some features. It's nice if you're trying to make something look like it's in the background. Or else they have, sometimes I'll use pixelate. This little filter here, it just makes everything a lot more blocky and pixely. And another cool one that I'll sometimes use is outline. So if I go back to my background picture and I go to outline, you can actually make there be an outline of the different objects in the image. Alright, well that's pretty much it for today. I hope you guys learned something, and let me know in the comments down below what you'd like to see a video of next. I'll try to post a little more regularly. Thanks for watching and have a great day.